Welcome to this week's edition of the Construction CPA's Coffee Cafe. I am the Construction CPA, Lisa Raish. We are dropping the hammer on cash flow problems so you can build things that matter. This week's topic is we're going to be talking about retainage. So why retainage planning matters in your construction business. We see it a lot, especially with our clients who are running multiple larger long-term projects. We see it, they've gotten to the end of a project, you've done everything right, your margins are good on the project, but you know what? You still have thousands of dollars actually tied up in that project in its retainage. So what we're going to talk about today is that retainage, why in some cases it just quietly strains your cash flow. And if you have any other cash flow challenges, it really just, again, makes that cash flow snowball larger and more damaging. And so it can ultimately, put a lot of stress on your business. And of course, it can, in fact, create more dramatic cash flow crunches if you already have cash flow problems. So retainage is going to be just another one of those items that could potentially be kind of squeezing your cash flow. So drop in the chat if, retainage has ever messed up your cash flow. And I know, I'm sure there's plenty of you because we see it happen far too often with our clients. All right. So first, retainage is very, very common. And in many cases just is never really planned for at all. So, and if you are running 4, 5, 6 projects, that little tiny bit of cash that's held back, you take that across 4, 5, 6 jobs. Now it isn't just a little tiny cash flow snowball. It's gotten much bigger, and now you're really putting a really big chokehold on your cash flow. So it's not unique. You're not the only one that has this problem. Again, the thing is, you want to make sure that you're kind of planning for it and how it ultimately affects your overall cash flow. Um, you know, you're not unprofitable, because many of these contractors think the same thing. Well, I'm not profitable. These projects aren't profitable. They are, but it's just your cash is stuck. It's stuck there at the end of that project. So we want to make sure that we understand, what the retainage is, all right, how you plan for it, how you plan for the cash, how you plan for it, figure it into your pricing, and then ultimately using considering it in your billing, then making sure that everything it works realistically and fits into your overall cash flow plan, right? So retainage is not lost money. It's just delayed money. Okay. That's money that's going to come later on. But that delay, or the length of that delay, is what's going to matter to you in your business. So again, you're not losing profitability. It's just, it is that money that is literally held on till the end of that project. And that's what you have to wait to get paid on. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about what the retainage really is. So simply, it's going to be a portion of payment that's held until the job is completed, right? It's incredibly common on commercial or larger residential jobs. Even if you're a trade on some of these larger commercial projects, you're the plumbing installer on, a new commercial building, or you're the electrical installer, right? You're on those commercial projects, you're typically going to have retainage, i.e. money held until the end on those projects. And sadly, it is usually released months after the work is done, right? So again, it's just that little bit of money that's held back throughout the life of that project that you don't get until the end. It's not affecting your profitability on the project. It affects your cash flow on the project. All right, so how does this retainage actually impact your cash flow? So very simple, your labor and your materials are going to be paid long before that retainage is released, right? So if you're working on a project for 5, 6, 8 months, again, you've been paying your team every week, your labor. You've been paying for your materials probably every 30 or 45 days, but that little bit of money is held back all the way until the end of that project. So again, if a project goes 8 months, and it may be a month or two after the project is actually completed, you could be 9, 10, 12 months before that last bit of cash actually comes to you. So Where the challenge really lies is if you are doing multiple projects, you're doing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 projects, all of that retainage stacks up over those multiple projects, right? So again, they're going to be paid out to you at different intervals because the projects where they are in their process, how far along you are is going to be different. But they're just going to stack up. So in many cases, if you're running 4 or 5 projects at one time, your retainage number could be quite significant, right? And this is all money you are going to get paid, but it doesn't come until the end. So what happens now is if you have a very busy schedule, and again, you're running the 5, 6, 8 projects, they're all running all over the place, right? In some cases, it's going to make your problem even worse. It doesn't make it better, right? The money's still coming in, but it's just not enough money to cover all of your costs, right? So now you're chipping away at any kind of what feels like you're chipping away at the profit. It's not really the profit of the project. It's just the way that cash flow has been distributed to you. Does it match up with ultimately what you've invoiced, right? So again, it's just that little tiny bit they hold back. So if you're sending an invoice every month to the GC and this project goes on for 8 months, you've had a little tiny bit held back every single month for 8 months. And then that little bit maybe doesn't come back to you until month 10, right? And that's what you're waiting for. So what are some of the common mistakes that we see with retainage? So first, in some cases, some clients don't track it separately at all, right? So they don't even really know what that little piece is, right? Or, you forget to invoice or follow up on the release of that retainage at the end because now you've walked, you're done with the project. You spent maybe 6, 8 months there. You're done. There's no one going to the project any longer. You've submitted all of your invoices. Typically, that last piece is one more thing that you're going to need to do from an admin standpoint is to actually request the release of that. So sometimes, kind of the out of sight, out of mind, we're not going to the project anymore. Oh, that's right. We still have a retainage left that we still need to collect. You're off and you're on to 5 more projects. It's because it almost seems very separate. People forget to follow up on it. You need to price your jobs and think about how this delayed cash is going to affect your projects, right? How are you pricing? How are you figuring this into your pricing? Can you figure this into your pricing? Is there a little bit of padding in there for you to get to the end of that project and not be desperate for that retainage to show up? And then the other thing is that some just don't pay attention. They don't track it and they just assume, it'll work itself out at the end. Again, if you're not following up and you're not requesting that retainage payment, again, out of sight, out of mind, people forget about it, could be a significant amount of money. So it's something that you need to follow up on. So kind of planning, what makes the difference and why planning really makes the difference when we're talking about retainage. Simply, your planned retainage is going to be manageable cash flow, right? We've planned for this. We know when the cash is coming. It's not coming until all the way down here. So we've considered that throughout all of the months and considered that in our cash flow and how it's going to affect our cash flow. Instead of just, how much money is in my bank account, we're actually projecting and figuring out where the cash is flowing throughout the project. Unplanned retainage or unconsidered retainage is really going to constantly put stress on you. It's going to constantly create cash shortfalls. It's going to constantly make that, that cash flow snowball bigger and bigger. So again, you need to plan for it and think about the fact that, yes, I'm going to have to wait for this money. We are getting this money, but it comes long after we're done with the project. And we still need to do a little bit of homework at the end in order to actually put in, all the proper documentation so that it actually finally gets released to us. So in some cases, maybe it takes a little bit of work, but it's something that you need to plan for too. It's as very much as part of your monthly invoicing process and collecting. The retainage is going to be a part of it too. So you want to make sure you're considering that in your cash flow, in your processes. How are we ultimately going to get paid for this? We're still following up at the end to ensure we actually do receive our retainage. So what are some of the things that you can kind of do now, like those tips, takeaways for today? First, you need to track your retainage separately, right? You need to know exactly how much cash is being held on which projects, where the project is, how far out you are, etc. This is as much a part of the tracking of the project as the job costing for that project, right? It's still integral in what you're doing, your invoicing process, again, tracking it and knowing what it is at the end. You need to factor your retainage into your cash flow planning. It's not something, oh, we don't think about this. No, it's your delayed money is going to impact the cash coming in and the cash going out, i.e., the cash you have today to make payroll and the cash that you have today to pay your materials vendors or your subs. So you need to factor it into your cash flow planning. You are ultimately going to receive it as long as you go and you apply for it at the end. Now, if you haven't applied for it and you just let it go, then yes, that's lost money. That's money left on the table. That is absolutely going to hurt your profitability on a project. But if you're going after your retainage at the end, it's just delayed money, right? It's just delayed profitability. Your project hopefully is still profitable. Make sure you review your retainage terms before you sign a contract. You want to know how and when that retainage is ultimately going to get released. How long do you have to wait? What do you have to do to get it, right? You need to know kind of what the rules of engagement are, right? How are you going to get this thing in the end? Make sure that you invoice and you follow up on the retainage release. Again, just because you've left the site and you're not actually at that site anymore and sending invoices out monthly for work you've done doesn't mean that the retainage money is just going to show up. That's something typically you're going to have to invoice for. It has to be released. There are going to be things you're going to have to do to ensure it gets released. You want to know when and where these things are going to happen. It don't want to be, oh, I don't know what to do. When are we going to get it? No, because if you know that based on what's in the contract, you can plan for it when you're planning your cash flow. Make sure you build the retainage delays into any of your pricing decisions. There are going to be times where maybe you've done work for a specific GC before, and after the project ends, maybe this one GC, you wait a lot longer to get that retainage released after your part of the project is closed. So make sure you're thinking about that when you are building out your pricing, right? That timing of that cash is going to matter, and it is going to matter when you're determining your margin. So, you want to factor that into your pricing in some way. Build that in. If you know you're going to wait 60 days longer for this one GC than any of the other ones that you work for, you want to factor that in and think about that in your pricing. So, your retainage doesn't have to be a cash wrecking ball, right? It doesn't have to damage your cash flow, but it absolutely will blow up your cash if you are ignoring it and don't pay attention to it. All right. So retainage it can cause stress on your cash, especially when you don't plan for it, you don't track it, and you don't follow up on it. It'll blow up your cash and it'll blow up your profitability. Absolutely. But if you're considering it in your pricing and in your overall cash flow forecasting, again, it's just another item you need to consider. All right, so next week, what are we going to be talking about? Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of tightening up your collections. We don't want to see those receivables get longer than they need to be. Sadly, in construction, they do get very, very long. So you make sure you want to have process and procedure around how you collect, because you could be waiting for a very long time and you get stuck, and it creates even worse. Again, you just make that cash flow snowball bigger and bigger. All right, so as always, we look forward to seeing you here every week. Follow us on all the socials at The Construction CPA. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I look forward to seeing you here every week, and I'll see you next week.